Welcome to the Quality Measurement in Health Professional Education, Revisiting the Metrics, our international conference, which I'm very pleased that kicks off today with the pre-conference workshops. Assessing the quality of health professional education interventions is a task that appears more difficult than the comparable task with clinical intervention. What to measure, how best we can measure it, and so what are important questions we are struggling and trying to find answer to it. Aim of this conference is to create an opportunity for health professionals, educators, regulatory bodies, healthcare authorities, public and private healthcare services providers to interact with experts in the fields of quality and assessment, share experiences, and how to introduce new assessment methods in their own contexts. The speakers are scholars and leaders of innovations in health professional education. The conference will be an excellent opportunity to meet, discuss, and exchange opinions and best practices in the field of assessment and program evaluation. It gives me a great pleasure and honor to present Professor Olle, the Professor of Medical Education and Scientific Director of Education, Senior Scientist at the Utrecht Center for Research and Development of Health Professional Education. Professor Cate has great interest in the area of competence-based education, and he has pioneered the introduction of the next level in assessment in medical education, which is measuring entrustability. Entrustable professional activities, or EPAs, is an area which is becoming very important in the field of medical education. It goes beyond assessment of competencies to assessment of trust. And today, he has kindly accepted to give this workshop on tools and procedures to arrive at a valid, summative entrustment decisions. I am sure you are going to enjoy interacting with Professor Cate, and tomorrow it will be more exciting listening to his presentation and his keynote speech. Thank you very much, Olle, for accepting our invitation, and I'll be looking forward to have you with us very soon.
Okay, thank you very much for the really nice introduction. Let me share my screen now. So thank you again for the invitation to feature on this quality measurement in health professions education conference, revisiting the metrics of revisiting metrics as an international conference in Dubai. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that live, but this is, I guess, the best alternative to do that remotely, and even if it is a workshop. So I was invited to do a workshop, and we'll find a way to have some interaction during this workshop. So I will start with quite a bit of information, but we will have, it's a little bit of an experiment, but I would like to do that the audience observe something, and I would like 3 of the audience to volunteer to interact with me more closely in I would say almost a game that we're playing that's related to entrustment decision making. So the overview of the workshop as a whole is that I'll start broadly and then zoom in more narrowly. So start broadly with assessment in medical education, just to give a picture of what are important elements of assessment in medical education in general, and then focus more on workplace-based assessment. So that's assessment that happens in the clinical workplace. What are procedures and tools that we can use there? and then say a little bit about what is entrustment decision-making, what is ad hoc, and what is versus summative entrustment decision-making for those who are unfamiliar with those concepts. And then we'll do that game. It could have, we sometimes do that in breakout groups, but in this case, I would actually like to do it as a demonstration. So I will be also role-playing, and I will be asking 3 people to interact with me in that role play. And then we'll end with a general discussion. So assessment in medical education, if you look at it in general, so why actually do we do that? What are the big purposes to assess learners in medical education? And you would probably think that's because we want to make sure that we have good learners or something. But if you look at it from a distance, you could say there is 3 purposes or 3 stakeholders or groups of stakeholders. One is the university or the educational institution. One is the society, and one is the student. So the university should make sure that graduating students and residents have met the criteria for a diploma, because the university awards a diploma. And you don't want to do that on wrong basis. You want to do it on valid basis. So if you're not doing that well, you're not a good university, and your esteem also depends on the quality of your assessment procedures. Then the society, of course. We are not a university just educating people for nothing or for very things that we cannot predict. We actually are very specific in health professions education. We know exactly what our graduate will start doing. So that is providing healthcare. And society has an obligation to provide high quality healthcare. That is, the government has that obligation. So the government and society, they really want to make sure that patients are protected against inadequate healthcare. So that's a societal or even governmental purpose as a stakeholder for good assessment. And of course, the third party would be the students. Students need to receive feedback for their own self-development. They also need that as an incentive to spend effort in studying. If we would not have any form of assessment, we would not really know whether people actually put that energy. So many students put energy because they know they are going to be assessed, and that's important for their progress in their development. So again, the institutional importance: universities are accredited only if they show that graduates meet standards. The university's reputation and student recruitment depend on high quality graduates. And you could call that an upward incentive. So the better your assessment is, the higher quality your graduate is, the better your reputation. And of course, more easily you are accredited as a university. So that's an upward incentive to make things better and better. Sometimes, however, it happens, if universities receive government funding based on the numbers of diplomas, some countries do that. Actually, in my country is also, there is a number of diplomas, and sometimes you could feel that as a downward incentive. So if you have many more diplomas, or actually you would graduate people who would not be deserved to graduate, that would be a downward incentive because your funding depends on it. So the whole mix of things are important. So the institution has to really balance. They want as many students as possible, but all students should meet all the criteria. And of course, the society is important. The governments must provide healthcare for the population, must protect their population against inadequate care. They need quality medical schools, so they have to establish schools. It could be public schools or support private schools. And of course, they need medical graduates because they just need those people to provide care for the population. Governments often pay for medical education and pay for residency education. It's quite a bit of money. And licensing those people often relies on exams that are actually guided by the government or by state. So those are important elements of 2 stakeholders. The third, probably arguably the most important stakeholder, is the student. So assessment drives learning, and even though if you would say, well, we're organizing assessment for learning instead of assessment of learning, however you turn that around, students will remain thinking about their assessment while they are in their educational program. It drives, to some extent, it always drives their learning, if only because we as schools and teachers and programs, we set the objectives that must be met. And therefore, actually, we should not really complain if students are assessment focused in their learning. Yes, there's somebody connecting. Anyway, I'll just continue. And then assessment in whatever form provides feedback to learners. If you don't receive feedback as a learner, you kind of lose direction for your studying. For written exams, it is pretty clear. In practice, in clinical practice and training, it is less clear. So you need the feedback, and the feedback could be by individual teachers who actually provide feedback, or it could also be as a result of assessment. Some small workplace-based assessment are very often linked to feedback. So feedback is highly important. And there's no way that you can monitor yourself well if you do not have external information on where are you in the whole trajectory. What are you doing well? What are things that you should be able to improve? So that is an important element of assessment that is needed for all students. We have to realize also that there could be something counterproductive also in assessment for students. We know, for instance, that we focus on competence, but also competition with other students sometimes is very prominent, and it can lead to stress, burnout, depressions. And if we look at the recent literature in medical education, residency education, we see that as a growing problem. And as those who are familiar with the assessment procedures in the United States may realize that there is a debate on how can we decrease that very fierce element of competition. And competition and competence are not necessarily correlated with each other. In competency-based education, what we really want is that all graduates meet standards of competence. If you have a system that's fully based on competition, you always want to rank students and compare students with each other. But for healthcare, you can really question whether that's important. If you have a system that's very competitive, but at the same time, you're training students, keep saying to students, we need you to collaborate. And competition and collaboration is not always compatible with each other. So we have to think about that too. Assessment can have a role in that. So in our creation of assessment systems, we have to think about that. And to finish my quote about the United States the North American model, you may realize that actually in this month, February 2022, the US MLE scores will not be published in actual scores and rankings, but only in a pass-fail decision. And that one of the reasons to do that is to decrease that sense of competition. But it's a very important topic of debate at this moment. So if we look at assessment procedures, it's very useful to look at this famous pyramid. It's called Miller's Pyramid, 1990. Many people of you may know it. And we have there's four layers, and it's very useful to think of those four layers as approaches to assessment in medical education. Nose is, of course, we have to assess knowledge. We have to assess applied knowledge, not just factual knowledge. You want to make sure that people know how to apply it to certain mechanisms of disease and mechanism of procedures of therapy. And of course, you'd want to integrate that with their skills. So knowledge and skill should be integrated. And we do that actually in OSCE exams. Most countries, and I'm sure in your countries in the Emirates, there's also quite a bit of OSCE exams. And that's important because here's where you integrate them. However, it is still in a standardized situation, and a standardized situation allows you for reliable assessment procedures with high reliability if you do that very well, and also valid to a certain extent. But what you really want to know, if people can do things right in the clinical space. So what you really need is knowledge, skills, attitudes integrated and observed in the context of patient care, which is not standardized. That changes every day. So you have to deal with those changes and still come up with a reasonable idea. Is this student ready to be graduating for unsupervised practice, I would say. So what types of procedures for assessment do we envision here? Everybody knows like written tests like multiple choice questions or constructed response questions for the knowledge and knows how levels, for the shows how levels, we use standardized performance tests in simulation with devices or with standardized patients. And workplace-based assessment, and I'll spend quite a bit of time on what are the procedures of workplace-based assessment grouped in 4 categories, but I'll come back to that later. So if you think of the predominance of assessment approaches across the educational continuum in undergraduate education, or actually across the whole continuum, and you go from top to bottom, you'll see that, of course, in preclinical students, there is a lot of knowledge testing. That's the blue bar, the knowledge testing, but also we're starting, and there's added skills testing. In the clinical space, of course, is still the knowledge testing. You can still do skills testing in standardized circumstances, but workplace-based assessment becomes more important for interns, for residents, and even for practitioners. Arguably, they should regularly be assessed to some extent. Are they still doing practice well? If needed, they might even do a skills test, specifically in the more procedural specialties where new procedures in healthcare actually emerge. And there might be a regular need to look at their knowledge too. So assessment modalities in those elements could be grouped in 2 big groups. So the assessment outside the workplace and workplace-based assessment. Outside the workplace, of course, we're talking about written or now online tests. Online tests are becoming very dominant, and they provide a number of features that we wouldn't have in just written tests. That's for knowledge and clinical reasoning and applying knowledge. Standardized skills tests for psychomotor and communication skills in simulation situation. But we could also look at products. So products would be something that people have produced, like a paper or a thesis or a design for something. Could be a research design, could be other design of maybe a design of a clinical procedure, or presentations could be seen as some sort of a product of students, that they could also be added to what we look at. And that could be also be watched all outside the clinical workplace. Now, inside the clinical workplace, we're talking about 4 major groups of workplace-based assessment. One is the brief direct observation, that is patient encounters or procedures. The longitudinal observation, and an example is multi-source feedback. There's oral conversations like case-based discussions, or entrustment-based discussion is a very specific one, and we'll come back to that in our exercise. And there's also the evaluation of products. And products, you could think of products as things that people produce for healthcare. It could be a treatment plan, it could be a discharge summary, it could be entries into the electronic records. So again, assessment outside the workplace, written assessment, multiple choice, open, constructed response items, standardized skills test using standardized patients for communication, physical examination, using simulation technology and products, as I said. And the moments that you could do that in preclinical curricula could be at the end of a course, could be during a course, That's usually formative. Sometimes a formative assessment made to a certain extent, but often a small extent, but could still also contribute to summative evaluations at the end of the course. Also, sometimes you could do something at the entry of a course, starting a rotation or starting a moment that you would say, well, we need to assess your entry skills to make sure what would be the things that you have to pay attention to in a clerkship, for instance. And then there could be moments of assessment that are independent of courses and rotations, actually independent of a specific curriculum. One example that has been frequently used is something called progress testing. It's a general curricular approach, a large end of training level exam, which is administered regularly from the very start of our curriculum. And that would show over time, if you monitor that well, it should show a progress of the individual over progress of a whole cohort or group. And then there's non-curricular, non-institutional state exams, such as in the United States would be the USMLE, United States Medical Licensing Exam, Step 1, during medical school, which is an exam on biomedical knowledge needed for a license. That's one example. And I'm not sure in your context, there might also be state exams that are not linked to a specific school. Let me give one example of one school. It's actually my own school, where we have these modes of evaluation. So from the top to the bottom is a 6-year curriculum, and we have knows and knows how assessment, the blue dots here. So they are end of a block course or end of a course that is an entry course for clinical training. We have in our school clinical training from the 3rd year on, and that increases over time. There's also shows how assessment in our school, we have summative exams actually in the 1st years, and we do still skills training and more smaller exams later, but those are the major ones are pretty early in the curriculum, but they could also be later. And the DOES exam, or workplace-based assessment, starts already in our 3rd year, where we use different tools. Now, what are the sorts of tools that you can think of in workplace-based assessment? Let's focus on workplace-based assessment. Again, let me reiterate, there is 4 basic groups. So the 4 basic groups is watching, direct observation in practice by a preceptor. There are numerous tools that have been described in the literature. The most famous ones are the mini clinical evaluation exercise or the direct observational procedural skill, DOPS, but there are many more. You can find them in the literature at various moments in practice. That could be, those are really snapshots of brief observations, direct observations. Then there could be oral discussions with a learner. There's the traditional case-based discussions. There's chart-stimulated recall discussion, CSR, or there's brief oral exams. There is the entrustment-based discussion procedure. There's 1-minute preceptor procedure. There is a procedure called SNAPS, or there's a mix of those. So there's also quite a number of assessment procedures where a conversation with a learner is actually predominant. Then there's longitudinal observation in practice. That is multi-source feedback, and I'll show an example of that in a minute. That can take some time to do that. It's not like a single observation. And there's evaluation of those products and discharge summaries or reports. So what we're doing is watching, talking and listening, monitoring, and evaluating outcomes, outcomes that have been produced. So if you think of it, it's actually those 4 modes, and good workplace-based assessment should include something of all those 4 modes. Here's those 4 modes in a more graphic form. The bracket observation, longitudinal case-based discussions, or product evaluations. It could be brief observation at the bedside, consultation room, procedures, morning rounds, hands over, any other brief situations. And when we come back later on entrustment decision-making, all these workplace-based assessment procedures can add information that is important for valid summative entrustment decision-making. So if you have those brief observations, this is a recommended paper by Kogan in Perspectives on Medical Education on the do's and don'ts for those, illustrated with one of them, a mini clinical evaluation exercise in its traditional form. But Kogan actually described it should be a cycle. And a supervisor asks students for a goal, the learner identifies a goal, the supervisor observes, gives real-time feedback, and after the observation, there's also a debrief. The student and supervisor analyze together and determine further goals, and student sets new design, and after a while, there's a new brief direct observation. Then there's longitudinal practice observation. Those could be done by multi-sources, different people actually included in that. We call that multi-source feedback, but there could also be like an individual over time that also makes a report. Multi-source feedback has been become popular, I would say, in the last 20 years. If multi-source feedback is used, you can just imagine that clinicians and nurses, other health professions, peer learners, junior learners, patients, could be all involved in providing that feedback that to some extent could be just formative, but to some extent could also add to a summative decision. Focus on general professionalism features is most important, that it's not so much specific skill. It's very often things that in the realm of professionalism, agency, reliability, integrity, humility, all those elements. And I'll go more in detail in my keynote tomorrow why those elements are important, but those are for the longitudinal practice observation. It's not so much the very specific skill for an activity that is dominant, but it's more the general professionalism features that people have. Recommended procedures to do that is to have an agreed upon time, could be a week or a weekend shift or a rotation even. Observations should not so much be planned, like direct observations are often planned. These are not scheduled because you just want to include moments that students are really not so much aware that they are being observed. But on the background, there's somebody just could just informally watch what you're doing. Observers may be chosen to do that. It's very interesting. We always have debate about that. Our experience is very useful to have a learner choose their own observers and get rich feedback from them. And when you have a discussion afterwards, just feel free if you would have questions about that. But also have anonymized reporting to the learner. Narrative feedback, we have to realize, is much better and much more informative and much more useful than scores. And you should use feedback report for facilitated feedback, MSF report for facilitated feedback and an action plan. So let me give one example. So if you use the Kent-Metz framework, you could just imagine there could have three broad categories. It's from a procedure that we have developed and used for 10 years in the Netherlands. There's medical colleagues, there's non-medical colleagues, and there's even patients, but not all of those could evaluate everything. So in the realm of expertise, it could be, of course, medical colleagues, but communication could be something that also patients and definitely non-medical colleagues can be involved in, professionalism too. And then there's leadership or collaboration and scholarship and health advocacy. So there are different things that different groups actually could observe when they are involved in multi-source feedback. So here's an example of a flow that could be used. and a procedure that has been used in the Netherlands. Here's where the program director, and it's completely automated procedure, so it uses the internet and emails to do this, and forms that also are always filled out directly online. So the program director sets an evaluation date, says to multiple residents usually. So we'll have, like 2 months from now, we'll have our progress meeting. Then the resident receives an email, instructions, and a link to a website, a username and a password, and is asked to choose to invite observers. And that could be peers, could be other medical supervisors, it could be nursing people from different categories. They provide, and if they agree, they provide email addresses in the system. Then, if those people have agreed to do this, they receive at a certain point in time, they receive an email with instructions and a link to open and fill out the questionnaire. And if they all have done that over time, a summary feedback report is created with mean scores. Scores are not so important. Most important are the narrative comments, and that is sent to the program director and to the resident, and it's all fully automated. And during that whole process, the resident can review the progress. They cannot review individual scores because it's anonymized, but they could, if a person does not react, they can see whether the people have actually done their work, the observers, but cannot see their individual scores. But they can invite new raters if needed or send reminders. The program director can review that and can actually open comments if there is questionable feedback that the program director needs some more information about. That's how that procedure works. Then, of course, the program director evaluates with the resident, and a new cycle may even start. So you could do this like twice a year or once a year. That's what the Dutch programs across the whole country have done with this program. So that was all longitudinal observation. Here's case-based discussions and oral exams. The purpose is usually not to only provide feedback. You can have a conversation. Direct observations are very often, as I said, followed by a feedback conversation. Now, case-based discussion is more focused on testing knowledge and insight and anticipated action. Case-based discussion is the British word, is usually in American, North American language is called chart-stimulated recall, where the discussion starts with entries into the patient record, conversation based on data and patient record to probe for clinical reasoning. And then there is the entrustment-based discussion, and we'll come more in detail on that procedure, come back to that. And then there's products. So what types of products can you think of? So it's log experiences, clinical encounter cards. Every time a patient is seen, you can ask a resident to record a little bit to make sure that you have some overview of what their experiences in clinical care have been, entries into electronic health record, transfer or discharge summaries, written reports like clinical research policy reports, sometimes an M&M report, morbidity mortality report, or maybe slides of a presentation or a poster. The clinical products could be outcomes of care. In some cases, like postgraduate surgical care, orthopedic care, dental reconstructions, that's really products of care. And you could actually evaluate those products. Radiological and ultrasound images, you could look at them and say, did you actually do that well? Presentations, so it's clinically appraised topics and other evidence-based medicine procedures. Then you could have a research presentation, clinical presentation, locally or nationally or internationally, and even a prepared teaching session for students. You can observe that, and that gives you a lot of information what people's knowledge is. Now, let's move from this very broad background to entrustment decision-making. So what is entrustment decision? What is trust? Trust is such an important concept. We just have to think of the universality of trust. that it's a necessary condition to participate in a smooth society. It allows for a reasonable prediction of happenings in the future beyond your direct control. We have to think of any time we trust, we kind of don't have that control so much. We have to just assume that people have good intentions with us and will treat us well. But it's really needed. If you step out the door, you're waiting for a bus station, you're waiting to come, you're trusting they're coming on time and the train leaves on time. There's so many elements that you have to trust. It's directly in your own family, your friends, your colleagues, but also information sources, your teachers, your journals, your encyclopedias, your professors, employers. You have to trust your employer. You entrust the hospital. If you're a patient, you're trusting the hospital, something that's not under your control. Or you, as a citizen, you have to trust your parliament, or you have to trust your legal system. Or when you take a train, you have to trust the engineers actually have done their work well, or trust the pilots, or trust the construction, or skyscrapers, or even like a roller coaster. So trust is defined in one of the papers that we often cite is like the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the action of another party or the products of another party, based on the expectation that the other will perform in a particular action important to the trustor, if I'm the trustor, irrespective of the ability to monitor or control that other party. So that is really trust, and we need trust. We cannot do without trust. If we would not have trust, we couldn't do anything in regular life, actually. Now, if we entrust, that's the word that we're starting to use in medical education. When we entrust, we look at the Oxford English Dictionary. It says to confide or the care or disposal of a thing or a person or the execution of a task to or with a person. So that's exactly what we're talking about. And entrustment has a history in medical education. If we go back to one of the first, of course, Greek mythology, here's Apollo, the goddess Apollo. You could see him in the god Apollo in the middle of the picture is entrusting his son, Asclepius, his small baby, to Centaur Chiron with the education of Asclepius. And of course, we all know what that brought us. Asclepius was actually educated by the Centaur and also introduced in the art of medicine. And we still use Asclepius symbols of the rod and the stick and the snake as our symbol for medicine. So let's go back to medicine and medical education. If we think of trust, there's three domains of trust: presumptive trust, initial trust, and grounded trust. So presumptive trust is the trust that we have in a person or another based on their credentials, degrees, and references, not because we know them. It might be somebody who we do not know at all. That could be in healthcare when you have a new employer. It is a graduate from Harvard Medical School. You probably would trust that person to do well in your clinical space if they come apply for a position as a physician. But that's presumptive trust. You presume that. And we have to realize that for patients, presumptive trust is predominant always, because we are delivering graduates, and the patient must just presume that we have done our best as educators, best as we can, to deliver graduates who do well. Then there's initial trust. If we have a new encounter with a person, we have swift trust based on first impressions. Like something like, I discussed with her the first patient encounter, and that sounded really adequate. So this is probably a good resident or a good medical student. And then there's grounded trust, and that's what we have to do. So our educational, I would say our educational task is really to have sufficient observation of a learner to be able to say this learner is really ready for unsupervised practice. For instance, if you would describe that, just a single moment for an individual could be like 3 ratings above expectation, 1 below. For this person, there was multi-source feedback, was mostly okay, but 1 patient had complained. There's a case presentation that is still a little bit unorganized, but she needs to work on logical thinking and structure. And she's not really ready for us before we can entrust her with this critical activity. And so you have to work on that, get feedback, and then finally ground that trust because you have enough observations that are sufficient. And if you think of that as a cycle, people come in, if you are a residency program director, you have students from a medical school, so you have some sort of presumptive trust. If they graduated from medical school, you're expecting this and that should be able to do. But then you're starting observing and realize they have to learn more things in your rotation. So you start with some initial trust usually, but then you have to have grounded trust for the new things in your rotation. And after your rotation, that you should be confident that the next stage of their development could be a new stage in education or maybe starting practice. They should be ready for justified presumptive trust by others. So here's where we get at the concept of entrustable professional activities. If we do that, it's hard to say we guarantee that this person is ready for presumptive trust across the whole domain of our specialty or the whole domain of medicine after undergraduate training. So what we're doing with EPAs is we break that down in manageable units of practice. So an EPA is a unit of professional practice, and you can think of it as a big task, responsibility, sometimes a bundle of tasks that can be fully entrusted to a trainee once we have observed that person or they have demonstrated that they have the necessary competence to execute that activity unsupervised. So because we can oversee it, we can use that as a component in our evaluation. The purpose to do that is to operationalize competency-based medical education, so a stepwise and safe engagement of trainees in clinical practice with progressive bounded autonomy. And to become competent is to pass a threshold that allows for sufficient trust in the trainee to act unsupervised. Here, I do have a little overlap with the talk tomorrow, but I think it's needed to understand before we go to the exercise what we're actually doing. Because when we operationalize competent, one way to do that is to say, when a professional activity is mastered at a threshold level that permits that trust to act unsupervised. So it's a stage in a developmental continuum that person is ready now. And if you see that as a growth of competence over time, and you superimpose that framework of development, you can see there is in training, there is one moment, and it's not the highest level, but there's that threshold level of readiness for unsupervised practice. And this, you could apply this to one EPA, one unit of professional practice. If people keep practicing that task in the future, of course, their proficiency will still increase and they will become an expert. But there is this one moment that they are ready for unsupervised practice. We have to, as educators, make a summative decision about that. Because if we do not do that for an EPA, how do we know that person is really ready to graduate? For each of the EPAs that we are using in our program, we need to make that summative decision. How do you arrive at a summative decision? What information do you actually need? Here's where the whole domain of those workplace-based assessment, those elements of those 4 groups are important to arrive at that summative decision. So there could be ad hoc decisions. For every learner in the clinical workplace, there are decisions that are taken almost daily. So here, it occurs in a routine practice of clinical practice. And those ad hoc decisions lead in multiple, if there's multiple of them, lead to a summative decision. And a summative decision is usually taken by a team and use multiple workplace-based assessment. Sometimes they are called a STAR, a Statement of Awarded Responsibility for an EPA. Now you are ready for indirect supervision or unsupervised practice. So if you think of the flow of workplace-based assessment, here is where there is a specific task that is being evaluated multiple times. And every time that is evaluated, there's feedback to the learner, and of course, after observation, but there's also some information that you can store, preferably in a portfolio of the learner. And then after a while, a clinical competency committee may be able to make that decision and to evaluate a request to do that as a summative entrustment decision for unsupervised practice based on the data that are available, and then they might be able to give a STAR. So remember, summative entrustment decisions, there is a golden rule, and the golden rule is that low stakes assessment and decisions are done by individual supervisors. And a low stakes assessment is simply that you would say, I'm next to a learner, is busy with a patient, and you say to the learner, I think I can leave the room now, just go ahead, you. And that is actually an entrustment decision, because you are now trusting the student will do well with that patient. So that's a low stakes assessment, and you can evaluate afterwards. You can talk to the learner, say, well, how did you do? What did you find? And then you make up your mind whether you think this learner did well, and you could report that. And now all those reports can lead to high stakes decisions made by teams. So the golden rule is low stakes assessments are made by individuals, high stakes assessments are made by teams. The information from all available tools, observations, discussions, MSF products are all gathered, preferably in an e-portfolio. Trainee can request for a summative decision at level 4 or level 3. Level 4 is what we call permission to act unsupervised. It's usually done in postgraduate training. Or level 3 is permission to act with indirect supervision, and that's usually done in undergraduate training. So clinical competency committees are required, those teams are required for valid summative entrustment decisions, required in the United States, required in Canada, and in a number of other countries. They are needed for what we now call programmatic assessment, and they have various names, very often competency committees. Sometimes they are even called an entrustment committee. You have to recruit the right members for that, some diversity. There might even non-medical people be involved, like nursing, who are very experienced nurses. They may also have very valuable information. Members need to be trained. You have to meet routinely, sometimes at least twice a year, but preferably 4 times a year. Some committees, yesterday I had another presentation, anesthesia in the Netherlands. They do that every month. And review their residents. All residents need to be reviewed from early into education into the program. Aim at a group of people of 5 to 8, but at least 3 with a chair, could be a program director or a deputy or appointed. Could input is all from assessment data, preferably in the e-portfolio, and visualized in a learner dashboard, and other experiences with learners could be also compared. Output are decisions on progress, summative entrustment decisions regarding EPAs, and feedback for learners. So we have now have all that big background, and I would like to proceed with, and I think we have still over half an hour, so we could do this exercise well and then open up for a general discussion. I would like to do an experiment that I have not done before in this way. And for that experiment, actually, I need 3 volunteers. So I'm just asking Siva Priva to watch the chat. And if there are people who are willing to be a volunteer for a conversation with me that is being actually listened to by the rest of the audience. If they are willing to do that, can you keep track of their name? But first, let me explain what the exercise really is. So there's one specific tool that was actually designed specifically for entrustment procedures. It's called the entrustment-based discussion. It is a specific form of a case-based discussion. And the focus of that discussion is the evaluation of risks before entrustment. So I talked about risks and trust, and so that's so central to the idea of entrustment decisions that we have that whole procedure just focused on that. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes. It can be after a critical activity or anticipated future activities. It is not primarily evaluating what was done, but the focus really is to estimate how a trainee will act in the future. Why is that important? Let me explain that. Even if you have a complete set of all possible workplace-based assessment, you are looking at learners on what they do now. But you have to evaluate them for things in the future. And even the learners may not have encountered everything that's important for all the work that they will do after they graduate. So you also need an estimation whether they will deal with unfamiliar problems or rare situations. And that is what the entrustment-based discussion is about. It's not just about how well did you do things, but are you ready for things that you have never encountered, for instance. So it is actually a procedure that's more prospective, looking at the future, than retrospective. So how does the procedure work? So there's 4 steps, 4 major questions. So try to remember those 4 questions. The first question is, what did you do? So or it could also be, explain to me what that activity actually is. So do you understand the activity? So the learner explains the case or the EPA, and then show a depth of knowledge. So why do people do that? Why is it needed to do that activity? Why did you do that? And they could explain the relevance and related findings relates finding to prior knowledge, like they understand, have some depth of knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and diagnostic tests. So they really understand what the activity is. So if you are just take a few minutes to do that and focus then on questions 3 and 4. So question 3 is, are you aware of what could have gone wrong? So what are the risks that are associated with this activity? Are you aware of that? We must make sure that the learner is aware of those risks, because if they're not aware, they cannot anticipate on solving any problems that they would encounter. Even though everything went right up to now, in an unfamiliar new situations, there might be other things that happen. So are you aware of those risks? So we just ask the learner, are they aware? And then we hope to see proactivity for new cases. And that is, we can only do that if we have what if questions. What if? What would you have done if, or what will you do if the patient is different? Different age, different gender, different culture, different medical history, different expectations, or there's unexpected findings. That's all action-oriented. Will the trainee know what to do? That's a funny question, is that, will the trainee know what to do when they don't know what to do? Everybody recognizes that situation at a certain point. My God, what should I do now? And then you'd have to make sure that the trainee actually knows what to do, and knows, maybe has a telephone number that they can call someone, or anything that you can think of. So now let me explain the exercise that we'd like to do. We need 3 volunteers to engage in an entrustment-based discussion. Actually, the discussion is with 1 person, but I just wanted to make it a little easier. So I'll give you a chance to to decide who is actually asking the question, and then have the three of you have a conversation with each other, what next question you would ask me. So the three of you together exemplify actually one preceptor, one supervisor. And the supervisor is asking questions to the learner. I will play that learner. I will play the quote unquote student. So you play, the volunteers play together, the supervisor. They can discuss among each other what next questions to ask. Now, the scenario, I will take a minute to have you read the scenario. I'll read it out loud for you too. It's actually not from medical education. I wanted to do something that is more a general, like a personal life situation that everybody can relate to. So my first question for Siva Priyava.
Yes.
Are there people who have volunteered?
We have 6 people who are willing to volunteer.
Oh, okay. So we can only have 3 because it would be a little too much if we had to have 6, I think. But can you just take 3 of them, and then those 3, maybe the ones on top of the list, or maybe you can let them know who we are choosing.
Okay.
And then let me go to the next slide first and talk with you about the scenario. So the scenario is like this. It is February. Actually, it is February. The weather is beautiful. I hope the weather is beautiful at your place. You live in a suburb with many green areas. The street is not very busy. Occasional cars drive by. Your neighbors is a nice couple with a son called Mike or Michael, 16 years old. Now, think of this situation. You took the day off because your mother, who is elderly and fragile with impaired eyesight, is coming to stay for a few days. So you arranged to pick her up from the local airport, which is at 5 p.m. There's 20 minutes drive to the airport. However, at 3 p.m., you tripped on the stairs and you really fell and injured your ankle. You are not able to walk and bear any weight on it. You may even have a fracture. However, your mother is in flight at this moment. You cannot reach her. You are not able to have, and she might not even have her cell phone with you. You don't really know. You just agreed with her. You would pick her up from the airport. Now you try to arrange for a taxi or a ride share, but nothing is available. Your spouse is cannot break away from work. You're just on your own. Now you know Mike is home. You just saw him, and he's just alone at home. And you know that he just earned his restricted provisional driver's license. So means no driving between midnight and 5 a.m. and there's no more than one passenger under 21 who's not a family member. So that is the restrictions. But he can actually drive because he has that license. And you see he had just gotten home from school. You consider asking him to drive your car to pick up your mother from the airport. And he will Mike, he will probably be very excited. So invite Mike to come over for a brief chat before you decide to ask him for help. So consider what you will discuss in this conversation and think of the 4 EBD steps. So the 4 steps are, and have you all read this well? I'll stop sharing my screen because that would be actually nicer. Is there a way that we can see those 3 people?
Yeah, so Professor Savitri, I apologize if I'm not giving the right salutations. Professor Savitri, Dr. Pankaj, and Dr. Arva will be the volunteers for the session. So would request them to please open their mic and the camera so that we all can look into the discussion.
So is there a way that we could have or should we have a gallery view? We have a gallery view. Yes, perfect. There's one coming up, and if you open your camera, yes. Is it okay if I address you with your first name? So Arva, Pankaj and Th.J.
Yes.
So thank you so much for engaging. Thank you so much for engaging in this exercise. So let's take about 10 minutes, and the three of you can discuss among you what questions to ask. So you are together, actually. You are the person who is not able to pick her mother up. I will be Mike. So why don't you can take turns, and then somebody else may take over. So the first question is by one of you. So I would say, Th.J, can you ask the first question, and then somebody else can take over from you. So I'm Mike.
So Mike, what have you done so far with regard to driving?
To driving. Oh, I just got my license, so I'm super happy, because I really like the driving lessons so much. So I was actually pretty good in driving. So
right. So how long have you been practicing driving?
Oh, 2 weeks now.
2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, and actually my dad has his car. He's not at home now, but I could drive his car when he was there, and he was really, I kind of proud too, because so I practiced almost every day afterwards, because I wanted to. So that's what he let me do. So Arva, what's your next question?
Okay.
Yeah, maybe another volunteer would like to ask.
Hi, Mike. How have you been doing today?
Today, yes, I actually, I just came home from school, and I'm looking forward. I'm waiting for my dad to come home, because then I can ask him to drive his car again. So I'm so excited to do that.
You must be enjoying driving as well, right?
Yes, I really like driving.
Yeah. So which car do you have? Which car do you have?
So my dad has let me think. He has a pretty good car. So actually he has a new Tesla.
Yeah. That's great. Tesla is a great car, I know.
Yeah. So he's super proud of it. Yes.
Okay. So how comfortable do you feel driving now with a new license? I know you must be excited. So how comfortable you are with the driving on the roads and driving in the city area?
Well, during my lessons, I had to drive just everywhere. So I had on the highways, but also in the city, and I had to do all the exercises. So I have been in the city and on the highways. So
that's great. That's cool. That's so nice, and I really appreciate that. It's very exciting to drive the new car, and it's great fun.
Yeah, I really like it. Yeah.
So can we go on with the main thing, or we would start off with the main agenda for our work, or its introduction?
We still have 2 other questions.
We
would like to ask the third question.
Yeah.
So actually speaking, what we would want, the thing is, I was expecting my mother to be flying in today. Her flights comes at 5 o'clock. But unfortunately, what happened is I just twisted my ankle today afternoon. I just fell down from the stairs, and it's really difficult for me to actually go ahead and pick her up from the airport. So I was just wondering whether it's okay for you to go ahead and pick up at the airport at 5 o'clock today evening.
Yeah, sure. So I know you have a car, because I always look at your car. It's not a Tesla, but it's still a nice car. Actually, I would be. I've never driven that car, but I would like to. Yeah.
The first car you drove is Tesla. You never.
Well, yes, no. That's just my dad has a Tesla. But of course, the drivers, all my driver's lessons were in a regular car, and it was like a Honda. But so that was the car that I had my lessons in. I've most experience with the Honda, actually.
Yeah. I think I also have a Honda, so I think you'll be able to be very comfortable driving a Honda. So you would probably know the difference between electrical car and the Honda cars. So.
Yes, I learned electrical car from my dad, so that is different. But the Honda is a regular car. And is yours electrical, or is it?
No, mine is also Honda. It's a Honda Pilot.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's perfect. So Titi, can you take over the role?
Yeah. If have you ever come across where when you drove the Tesla, suddenly the electricity was off or you ran out of gasoline? What did you do?
I've never experienced that. So
Did you always check your car before you drive?
yeah, I just assume it's okay. I don't know. I mean, my dad always plugs in at night, so it's usually and I don't go very far. I mean, just go. I ask my dad or my mom actually, can I go for grocery stores as a surprise, because I never wanted to do that, but now can I drag dad's car to the grocery store? So it's not very far. So
Right.
I never attend to that actually.
Did you have any record of overspeed?
No, never done that. It would be fun actually to do a high speed, but I never.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, maybe.
Arwa, maybe Arwa would like to ask.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. I'd like to ask: do you always wear your belt, your car seat belt?
Can you repeat? Yeah.
I said, do you always wear your car seat belt? The safety belt?
I must do it. Yeah. My dad says I must do it. So I do actually always wear the belt. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Have you ever been in a car accident before?
No.
No. Do you know what would happen? Like, what would you do if you did have a car accident?
I don't. Yeah. Well, I don't really know actually. So I'm not sure. So no. Yeah.
Okay.
What should I do? Yeah.
Have you ever been pulled over by a police?
By police? No.
Have you ever been pulled?
No.
No. Do you know the procedure, what you're supposed to do if that happens?
If that happens, well, I hope it will never happen. Yeah, I have my driver's license, and they said I was actually, he said I was a safe driver, so I don't think that will happen. I'm not thinking,
Okay.
I don't like to think of.
Yeah. Do you know the papers that you're supposed to always have with you? The documents?
Documents. Well, I don't really know. My dad has his documents, but I'm not sure. It should probably in the car, but I never looked for it actually.
Okay.
Okay. So who next?
They already asked.
We'll still take a few minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Think of the whole task. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Okay.
Have you ever driven with someone? Did you have someone else in the car with you?
Well, of course, my dad and my mom. No, and the driver's instructor, but no other people.
Okay.
I had an examiner, of course. When I had exam, there was a different person, so an examiner. But that was all.
Okay.
So how comfortable do you feel that if you're driving and someone is in the car with you?
So far, I've been just fine.
Yeah.
So is your mother? Is she a nice person? Or...
Yeah, she is, and she is very talkative. So I hope you don't get distracted by her.
Talkative. Oh, all right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think, but probably you will know exactly how the car works. So I just want to just have an idea that you would because you suddenly joined, you just got a license. So sometimes it's difficult, where the lights are, where the wiper is. So sometimes I hope you have a good knowledge of the car itself.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So I'm actually since it's also Honda. I think it's probably I'm probably understand how well the car, all the things of the car. So that should be not a problem.
I have one more questions. Have you ever, I mean, if because the mother is fragile and quite elderly, what would you do if she suddenly felt sick, or she suddenly want to do something?
I don't know. I would probably speed up and get home as soon as possible if she doesn't feel well. Is she really seriously feels well, or do you think I should also consider going to a hospital with her? Is she not well? Is she?
Yes, she has an impaired eyesight.
Okay, she can't see well. Okay.
Yeah.
How will she recognize me?
Well, I'm going to give you a photograph.
So you
Yeah,
see,
but she's already in a plane, so we can't communicate with her. So maybe you can take your play card and then you can write a
Okay.
name and say, here am
Okay.
I.
Yeah,
Can
I think, yeah, I maybe I should put her name then.
Yeah.
Then she can recognize her own name. Yes, okay. Any other questions?
We have some questions from the participants, if I may be allowed to read it for you.
Sure. Yes, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so the first question from Sana Radi. Do you know the way to the airport? Can you use the GPS?
The way to the, well, I've never been to the airport really. So I went to the city and I went to the highways, but we never really didn't go to the airport. But it shouldn't be too difficult because my instructor showed me how to use the navigator. And I had to actually use it also a few times. Then he said, well, I want you to drive there and there. It's never to the airport, but other places. So I could do it in our instructor car, and also in really the Tesla has a really large display for that. It's really easy to do that. Do you have a display like that in your car?
I guess it's supposed to be. Yes, it's supposed to. Let's assume that we have it.
Okay.
The
And
next question is, can you manage if you have a car problem, or do you know how to drive in a traffic jam?
in a traffic jam, I just have to be very slow. Maybe I should, you know what, maybe I should not wait too long because if it takes a lot of time and there is a traffic jam, I should go make sure that I'm leaving it in time.
Okay, and question from Professor Imad, how much your father trusts your driving skills?
Yes, he says it's okay because he says, if you don't go far away, you can use my car. So he must trust me.
Okay, great. From Thuraya, can you drive in situations where there are crying or screaming kids or a stressed passenger with you?
There's no kids in the car, right? Oh, or you mean, could your mother start screaming also, or? Probably
a stressed passenger with you, how would you handle? Do you know how to handle the situations?
I've never done it. You know, if it becomes difficult, maybe you have to pull up to the side and then just stop and see if there's a problem that we need to solve or so before I can go on.
And from Dr. Asma, the mother and Mike are completely strangers. How he will try to communicate with her?
How will I communicate with the mother? Yeah, of course she will understand me. I think I think you said she didn't see well, but I think she hears well. So I will have to explain I'm the neighbor kid and your daughter. So you're the daughter. So your daughter, I will say to her, asked me to pick you up. So yeah, maybe I should just explain who I am, and then I hope she will go with me in the car. Yeah, I hope so. What? Okay. Is she a nice person that she would do that, or will she be scared when I come, or is it okay? One of the three of you.
It's okay.
Okay, all right.
And should I read the questions further, Professor?
Yeah, well, you know, I suggest that we terminate the exercise, but I would like to, maybe we can actually do that here. So now say that you would have to make a decision. You're quite stressed because your mother is coming and you need something. So in this case, who would allow Mike to pick up the mother? Maybe there's three answers. One, no, I don't trust that person yet to do this. Second is yes, I would trust. The third would be no, I need more information. So can we put that in the chat and see if everybody would engage there? And then also you could also reflect on it. So just type something in, yes, no, or I need more information. So I see no, no, I need, yes, there's some explanation, need more information. Need more information. Yeah, I would suggest to ride with them. That's a good one. So a mother may not be able to drive, but she might be able to sit in the back. Yeah, provide him with phone number. That's good. Okay. Somebody appears nervous. Yeah. Yes. So let me also ask you, if you're still, your microphone's open, Th.J and Pankaj and Arva. What do you think?
Yes, I will trust.
Would you trust?
Yeah, I trust Mike to pick up my mother. It's time. The time is running because she's already flying. So we have to make quick decision.
Okay, and Arva, what do you think?
No, I wouldn't
Not-
trust Mike.
not yet. You wouldn't trust. And then Pankaj Lambda.
I would trust, but I would like to have a maybe test drive to see how you're been doing, because my mother, and I have one more problem now. I just realized, and being an ophthalmologist myself, that she has a poor eyesight. So I don't think my play card is going to work. So I need to find out some other way to make her come to your car. Maybe you will have to find her. And I am not very confident still how you'll be able to find her. Maybe I need to give a photograph or something, because still I am not very sure.
Yeah.
Because she has a weak eyesight, so it's going to be a challenge for her to be spotting you.
Yes. So it really is. I think it's a nice exercise, and maybe we can start translating that to the clinical situation. And I think I still like the quote that, do you know what to do when you don't know what to do? There could always be things that happen. And of course, you've also said accidents. There must be something that he actually comes up with, what he will do when something happens. If you don't know, if he just says, I don't know what to do, then it's going to be difficult, but it's all action oriented. So the entrustment-based discussion is action oriented. You have to, even if they would say, well, I'll give me your phone number and I'll make sure that my smartphone is it has enough power, and so I can always reach someone, that I can always reach you, or there may be something else, or my own parents, or and then and usually the airports are quite complicated to get there, actually. So very often you cannot even park your car where you want to pick someone up. So it's pretty complicated. If you've never been there, it's not so easy to pick someone up. So so there's all sorts of things, and if you think of it more long, you could come up with scenarios you could ask. So if you are in a clinical situation, you could also think of scenarios ahead of your conversation with a learner and say, well, this is entrustment, it's ahead, and we have to make a recommendation for the clinical competency committee. Could I recommend that this learner could do things unsupervised? I'm not sure that they can stay out of trouble or know what to do when there's difficulties or unfamiliar situations. And you have to just provide those unfamiliar situations. Say what if you're maybe you, in ophthalmology, you have to make a decision whether a person is ready for cataract surgery. Can you do that cataract surgery just by yourself? What could be the complications? How would you solve that? How would you do that in patients that are unhelpful, or they, or maybe with compromised health? Or you can just imagine, you can, for all sorts of situations, you could come up with scenarios that you could use in those conversations. So we have not so much time anymore, right?
Professor Olle, may I be allowed to interrupt just with Professor Hussam Hamdi for 2 minutes, please?
Yes, and we actually have, I think, 6 minutes, and it's fun to do.
Olle.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, good to see you. Yes.
Hello, and I just want to express my thanks and really appreciation that you have accepted our invitation. And I was looking very much forward to be together in person. But I'm sure now with things are getting much, much better, that any convenient time for you, you'll be more than welcome, and we'll make sure that within the coming few months, you should come and visit us here in UAE and be with you. Maybe how many? Maybe 200 are attending this 100, but there are many others who have approximately more than 2,000 have joined this this conference. But I want to share with you that Professor Olle and Cate was my examiner when I did my PhD in Groningen about 21 years ago. I was at that time the dean of the College of Medicine in Bahrain. They were looking at me, why someone who is a dean, he still wants to take a PhD while I have other PhDs in surgery. And I remember in our last meeting in Islamabad, we were having dinner at this nice restaurant at the top of a hill. And I was trying to summarize in a way in my understanding about EPAs. And I perhaps you remember, Olle, I told you that when I was in UK in training, and at night when I have a patient whom I have to operate on, and they call the consultant at 9, 10 after he had his dinner and relaxing, to inform him about this patient. And then he will summarize it in one word. Are you happy to proceed, Hussam? And I think the word, are you happy to proceed, is part of, it's a level of intrustability, which you have been presenting it at the levels of intrustability, just captured in this word, are you happy to proceed? So thank you very, very much for everything, Olle, and I'm sure the more than 2,000 who have registered this conference are waiting to listen for your next presentation tomorrow. So many, many thanks, my very dear friend.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. And are you happy to proceed with the conference?
If you entrust me, I will. Yes, I'm very happy with my great team with me.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Hassan.
Just a few minutes, I think, before we have to close, right? Yes.
Yeah, yes, Prof.
So, Dr. Pankaj Lamba had a question.
Thank you, sir, for such a nice presentation. Actually, we at UAE, we actually just want to inform you, we're trying to use EPAs as evaluation of our competency frameworks, and this is one of the major agendas of the workshop, which is going to happen after a couple of days. We were looking at whether we could use EPAs, because what I understand is EPAs is being used basically in clinical context or for patient care competency, basically, to see the entrustability decisions. Now, we were also trying to see whether we can map these EPAs to other competencies for something like professionalism, or professionalism is still be okay, but something like scholar or something the role of a health advocate or something like. So do you think EPAs are a good match to map other competencies than main core patient care and the entrustable decisions of performing a patient care activity?
Yes, so my answer is really that those elements of professionalism and health advocacy and other things are actually really integrated into patient care. So they're not, I wouldn't consider them outside patient care. But sometimes it's difficult to qualify something that you would find important as an EPA. So if you have to think of it, I have once written a paper with a colleague about interprofessional education, and people would say interprofessional collaboration, could that be an EPA? And the answer that we actually had is interprofessional collaboration is so important in many EPAs. So if you are a surgeon or and then you'd have to work with your colleagues. If there's no way that you could even do an EPA if you're not doing interprofessional on high level interprofessional collaboration. So interprofessional collaboration, I would see as a condition for the EPA. So the EPA itself is actually an activity with a beginning and an end that you can evaluate, and that's a contribution to healthcare. But it is a discrete task, and for every discrete task, almost everything in healthcare, you have to integrate those elements that are also part of professionalism, because they are so important. So if you would say, I will not, if you do cataract surgery, for instance, you could say, well, that's a very specific skill, and it's very important because many people actually need that help, and if you don't do that skill well, you're not doing. But if you cannot like convince the patient that's good for the patient, or have a good collaboration with your assistants, you cannot be trusted to do that. So people could not say, well, even in a skills lab, there are really sophisticated procedures for cataract surgery. So you can do the skill, but now you have to do it in practice. And here's where professionalism is part of that EPA. So it's actually integrated into that EPA. And if you would say like health advocacy is a separate EPA, why is it not done part of the other EPAs? Is that one EPA and that you could like be qualified for that for health advocacy, but then you have other EPAs? So actually those elements, those more professionalism elements, I would say they are conditional for entrustment decisions for EPA. That would be my answer, actually.
Yeah, but there's other activities like scholar and health educator, so they sometimes becomes very difficult for us to map into an EPA.
So scholars actually have different levels. If you are a PhD student, scholar is actually something that has many elements to them. If you are a clinician, then in a difficult case, so if you would have an entrustment-based discussion like we just had, here's a difficult case, a rare case, and you're still supposed to doing. If you cannot review the literature well, solve that, then you cannot deal with difficult, rare cases. So it's a condition for dealing with rare cases that you have scholarly skills, that you know how PubMed works, and look at the secondary literature, look at the primary literature, understand, actually have some understanding of the quality of publications. So I actually see also even scholar as a component that is conditional for high stakes entrustment decisions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Savitri, Dr. Pankaj, and Dr. Arva for the volunteering. And thank you all the participants. And Professor Olle, there's a lot of feedback on the EP activity. They say it is really brainstorming. And they need more time to work out on this activity. And thank you, Professor Olle, for this kind gesture of giving us an enlightenment on EP activities. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We're at the end of the session, right? Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
Professor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll see you.